In this lecture, you will learn about professional counseling ethics and some of the variables and background factors that go into our ethical decision making. Pat has been working with an elderly man who is very sick. His doctors all agree he has very little time left to live. He is in terrible pain. The client tells Pat that he cannot afford to continue to pay his health care bills. He admits that he is planning to commit suicide and explains exactly how he intends to do it. He has even discussed the plan with his wife. He has given up hope and finds no purpose in continuing to live. What should Pat do? Our ethical codes don't just drop out of the blue, although it might seem like that to you from time to time. As Christians, our ethical self emerges because we want to be followers of Christ. And as followers of Christ, Scripture has a lot to say about the ethical comportment of the people of God. Some of our ethical behaviors will align just out of sheer obedience to Scripture. And some of our ethical behavior will be in line with the expectations that are shaped by our own particular and peculiar participation in our Christian community. And you could take a look at Matthew 16:24 and Luke 11:28 for some examples of this. But our ethics are also shaped because we are citizens of a particular country, and we submit ourselves to the laws and the governing authorities of the country in which we are living. As Americans, we are also subject to the ethics as they are shaped by the U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights and our various state laws. Those first two apply to any person who's a citizen. But when we get down to the next category as licensed professionals, here is where we find the unique ethics codes that are those of our professional organization. And in the case of professional counseling, it's the American Counseling Association, as well as how those ethics codes become embedded in the laws that are under the licensure laws of each state. Finally, some of you may also be wearing hats of ordained clergy, and in that case, your ethics are also shaped by the requirements of your denomination. Here you can see this little triangle where we might say this is the percentage in our own minds of what we are aware of. So from the bottom, as the individual counselor, our ethics are shaped by our personal values, our personal sense of ethics, our beliefs, our culture, our religion, our family backgrounds, and there's probably more that could fit under that lowest level category. Next, we find the standards and ethics codes of our professional associations, the American Counseling Association, the Christian Association of Psychological Studies, for example. Then our civic and local government laws, our state government laws, and finally, the federal government U.S. Constitution. all of these line up and impact our ethical decision making. I1C out of the Ethics Codes for the American Counseling Association notes that at times there's going to be a conflict between our ethics and the law. Here it is. If ethical responsibilities conflict with the law, regulation, and/or other government legal authorities, counselors make known their commitment to the ACA Code of Ethics and take steps to resolve the conflict. If the conflict cannot be resolved using this approach, counselors, acting in the best interest of the client, may adhere to the requirements of the law, regulation, and/or other governing legal authorities. And as we proceed in this ethics course, we'll be looking at some of those times when our ethics code and the law might be in tension. Well, let's look at some key concepts that relates to the ethical comportment of counselors. First, there's the law itself. The law defines the minimum standards that society will tolerate, and this is enforced by government. So you have your counseling law, and embedded in that law will be a set of ethical standards. Those ethical standards can be enforced by the ethics committee as part of the law of your particular state. We also have the category of mandatory ethics. Mandatory ethics represent the minimal standard set and enforced by professional associations. Mandatory ethics carry the word must and must not. So counselors can meet the letter of the ethical standards of their profession. But this tends to be a rule-based approach, and it's rather limiting in assisting counselors with very complex ethical dilemmas. The next category are aspirational ethics, and this refers to the highest standard of professional conduct to which a counselor can aspire. In other words, it's how can I best help my client? So counselors under aspirational ethics do more than what is minimally required. This requires us to understand the spirit behind the ethics codes and the principles upon which the ethics codes rest when they encounter an ethical dilemma. Next are principle ethics. Principle ethics focus on the moral issues with the goal of solving a particular ethical dilemma. Not just how can I best help my client theoretically, but specifically, what shall I do when faced with an ethical dilemma? Moral principles that we're going to cover in a minute are seen as fundamental to our ethical reasoning, and they must be considered when we're working to resolve an ethical dilemma. And finally, we're going to be thinking about virtue ethics. Virtue ethics focus on the character traits of the counselor and non-obligatory ideals. Virtue ethics asks the question, who shall I be? This perspective believes that professional ethics involves more than just moral action. It also involves the character traits such as discernment or prudence, respectfulness, integrity, and self-awareness. So virtuous counselors recognize the role of emotion in judging ethical conduct and the importance of connectedness to the community. This provides a more culturally sensitive approach to ethical decision-making than mere reliance on principles alone. Our professional ethics, therefore, represent beliefs about behavior and conduct that will guide professional practice. Some of the functions of professional ethics include the protection of our clients, a guide for your professional behavior, ensuring the autonomy of professional counselors, increasing the status of the profession of counseling, enhancing the client's and the community's trust in the profession, articulating collective conduct between colleagues, and providing a mechanism for professional accountability. Ethical judgment is made up of the ability of making a wise decision or forming an opinion. It also requires sound judgment, and we have to ask our question, therefore, what affects our ethical judgment? Well, one thing that might affect your judgment are your prior cognitive commitments. This would be committing to an approach or a theory, an idea, or a belief about people or counseling that can and will influence our judgment. There's also our tendency to search for and agree with that which already supports our thinking, rather than be open to information that challenges what we currently think and believe. This is called the confirmation bias, where we pay attention to those pieces of information that confirm what we've already decided and concluded rather than challenge what we've decided and concluded. Our ethical judgment is also impacted by that which we consider authority in our lives. This would include the law, our supervisors, ethical codes, and scripture are sources of authorities that impact our ethical judgment. And finally, our ethical judgment will be impacted by the groups to which we belong, including our professional groups as well as our Christian groups to which we belong. So our ethical codes provide a framework for interpreting specific forms of conduct. The purpose of our ethical codes is to regulate the behavior of professional counselors and to provide guidance to professional counselors when they're faced with a dilemma. Professional counselors, therefore, are committed to upholding the ethical standards of practice that is required for membership in this particular profession. And our ethics serve as a binding force for members of this profession. Ethical standard I-1 states as follows: counselors know and understand the ACA Code of Ethics and other applicable ethics from professional organizations or certifications and licensure boards of which they are members. Lack of knowledge or misunderstanding of an ethical responsibility is not a defense against a charge of unethical conduct. And hopefully, by the end of this course, you will have a good grasp on the ethics codes of the American Counseling Association and know how to apply them to ethical dilemmas. Let's take a look at a category of things called ethical principles. These are found in the ACA Code of Ethics on page 3. So you might want to have your ACA ethics codes open to page 3 and follow along. The first core ethical principle is that of autonomy. This is promoting an individual's independence and self-determination. So counselors respect the freedom of clients to choose their own directions, make their own choices, and control their own lives. And we refrain from imposing goals, avoid being judgmental, and are accepting of different values. So counselors have an ethical obligation to decrease client dependency and foster independent decision-making and client empowerment. Ethical counselors refrain from imposing goals on our clients, avoid being judgmental, and we accept and work with the values that our clients bring with them into counseling. The next ethical principle is non-malfeasance. This means basically do no harm. As counselors, we take every precaution to be sure that our actions do not risk hurting our clients, even inadvertently. We avoid actions that put clients at risk of being harmed, and we take care that our actions do not risk hurting our clients because of a value difference that we have with our clients. Beneficence means promoting good, or the mental health and wellness of our clients becomes one of our primary ethical principles. So as counselors, we actively promote the growth and welfare of those we serve. We work for the good of the individual and society and actively promote the mental health and wellness of clients within their cultural context. The next ethical principle is justice. Justice means we have a commitment to fairness in our professional relationships and to the fair treatment of the individual when his and her interests need to be considered in the context of the rights and interest of others. We seek to treat all individuals equitably and foster fairness and equality. Justice includes consideration of such factors as quality of counseling services, the allocation of time and resources, the establishment of our counseling fees, and client access to counseling services. Fidelity. Counselors make honest promises and honor our commitments to our clients. This involves creating a trusting, therapeutic climate in which our clients can search for their own solutions, and we take care to avoid deception or exploit our clients in any way. And finally, veracity. Truthfulness. Without truthfulness, there will ultimately not be any trust. Without trust, the counseling relationship cannot succeed. And sometimes counseling requires you to speak forthrightly and yet truthfully to your client, thus speaking the truth in love. What I'd like you to do is to go back and review Pat's situation. And then review Pat's situation considering the core ethical principles. How might they relate to Pat's ethical decision making? Next, open the ACA ethical codes, and as you scan through them, make a list of those codes that you think Pat must consider as he wrestles with this dilemma. And then finally, consider your own values as a Christian counselor. and consider which beliefs come to play as you reflect on Pat's ethical decision making. There is not a written assignment associated with this particular activity as much as food for thought for you.